nature always surprises us with stories that defy everything we know about instinct and survival. In this image, an impossible scene unfolds before our eyes. A majestic lioness rests beside a fawn and a white puppy, protecting them as if they were her own. What you are about to discover goes beyond any logical explanation. This is not just a stunning photograph. It is the record of a bond that forever changed the lives of three souls lost in the vastness of the African savanna.
On the edge of a vast African reserve, park rangers brought in two frail orphans whom few believed would survive. A newborn fawn, with trembling legs and frightened eyes, had been found alone after its mother was attacked by hyenas during the night. Beside it, a white golden retriever puppy, abandoned by irresponsible tourists at the entrance to the reserve, cried incessantly, lost and hungry. Both were on the verge of death, dehydrated and too weak to even lift their heads. The rangers knew time was running out. The fawn, which they named Kali, needed constant warmth and intensive care to survive the critical first 48 hours. The white puppy, named Zuri, refused any food and trembled uncontrollably, entering a state of emotional shock. The chances of both surviving were minimal, and the reserve staff did not have sufficient resources to properly care for them overnight. It was then that someone suggested something that seemed absurd: placing the two orphans near Sala, a solitary lioness who lived isolated in a special enclosure in the reserve. Sala had lost her own cubs in a tragic forest fire months ago, and since then had wandered the enclosure heartbroken, refusing to interact with other animals. The idea was risky, but the team had no other options on that cold and desperate night.
As the rangers approached Sala's enclosure with the two orphans in their arms, the tension in the air was palpable. The lioness lay in the far corner, watching every movement with her intense golden eyes. She had spent weeks in complete isolation, rejecting any attempt at approach. No one knew how she would react to the presence of such fragile and vulnerable creatures in her territory. The rangers carefully placed Kali and Zuri on the ground, a few meters away from the lioness, and slowly retreated. For long minutes, nothing happened. Sala remained motionless, merely observing the two small beings trembling uncontrollably on the cold ground. Kali let out small, high-pitched sounds of despair, while Zuri whimpered softly, huddled up and frightened. The reserve staff watched from a distance, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of aggression. But then, something extraordinary began to happen. Sala slowly stood up, its enormous paws moving with surprising delicacy toward the orphans. Instead of baring her teeth or roaring, Sala lowered her majestic head and carefully sniffed each of them. Her eyes, once empty and distant, seemed to awaken with a new light. She lay down beside the two cubs, forming a protective circle with her powerful body. Kali immediately snuggled close to the warmth of her belly, while Zuri, still trembling, snuggled against her front paws. That night, something changed forever. The lioness who had lost everything found a reason to live again.
The first few days were the most challenging. Kali and Zuri needed constant feeding, but both refused the bottles offered by the rangers. The fawn would turn its face away whenever someone tried to feed it, and the white puppy would simply stubbornly close its mouth. The situation was becoming critical again, as the two orphans were losing weight rapidly. The reserve staff began to fear that despite Sala's care, the little ones would not be able to survive without proper nutrition. It was Sala who found the solution in a way no one expected. The lioness began licking Kali and Zuri's faces with her rough tongue, cleaning them as she would her own cubs. She gently nudged the bottle toward them with her heavy paw, encouraging them to accept the food. When Zuri finally began to drink, Sala stayed by her side, watching her every move. With Kali, she was even more patient, lying on her side so the fawn could feel safe while being fed by the rangers. Week after week, the routine settled in. Sala never left her adopted cubs alone, watching over them day and night with impressive dedication. When Callie tried to take her first trembling steps, Sala walked beside her, offering her body as support whenever the deer's delicate legs faltered. Zuri, in turn, discovered that the lioness's enormous paws were the perfect place to sleep, and Sala allowed the little one to snuggle against her whenever she was afraid of the nocturnal sounds of the savannah.
As the weeks turned into months, the transformation of the three was visible to everyone in the reserve. Callie grew in strength and confidence, her once trembling legs now running gracefully through the tall grass of the enclosure. Zuri developed a brilliant white coat, and her eyes reflected a contagious joy that charmed any visitor. But most impressive was observing how Sala had been completely reborn. The lioness, who once wandered with a vacant stare, now had purpose in every movement, protecting and nurturing her unlikely cubs with absolute maternal devotion. The dynamic between the three defied all known laws of nature. Every morning, Zuri would wake up first and run in circles around Sala, barking excitedly until the lioness opened her eyes and began to groom her fur with affectionate licks. Callie would stay close, watching with her attentive ears every sound in the reserve, always returning to hide behind Sala when something startled her. During the warm afternoons, the three would rest together under the shade of a large acacia tree, with Sala lying majestically in the center, while Callie and Zuri snuggled against her body. The forest rangers began to notice extraordinary behaviors. Sala had developed different sounds to communicate with each of her offspring. With Callie, she used low, soft purrs that instantly calmed the deer. For Zuri, she emitted small, playful snorts, encouraging the puppy to explore its surroundings. At night, when both slept soundly, Sala remained vigilant, her golden eyes scanning every shadow, every movement, ensuring that nothing bad happened to her unlikely family. Visitors from all over the world began to hear about the unlikely family living in the African reserve. Journalists, photographers, and researchers arrived daily to witness with their own eyes the extraordinary bond between predator, prey, and mate. Images of Sala lying peacefully with Callie and Zuri sprawled around her circulated everywhere, generating heated debates about maternal instinct, adaptation, and the mysteries of animal behavior that science could not yet fully explain. However, while the world celebrated this unique connection, the rangers faced a harsh reality that was inevitably approaching. Callie was growing rapidly and would soon need more space with other deer to develop her natural survival instincts. The reserve maintained a protected valley where a small herd of rescued deer lived safely away from predators. Zuri, in turn, had been promised to a local family who were eagerly waiting to adopt him and give him a permanent home beyond the reserve's fences. The team postponed the separation as long as possible, but the moment arrived when they could no longer delay. Callie needed to learn to live among her own kind, and Zuri deserved a life where she could run freely without the limitations of an enclosure. The decision was made in a tense meeting where everyone knew they were about to break something precious and rare. What no one could foresee was how Sala would react when she realized that her adopted cubs were about to leave forever.
The days leading up to the separation were marked by a subtle change in Sala's behavior. The lioness seemed to sense that something was different, as if a deep instinct warned that the farewell was near. She stayed even closer to Callie and Zuri, licking them for longer periods, checking every detail of their fur with obsessive attention. During the nights, she kept them pressed against her body with her front paws, as if she wanted to protect them from an invisible danger that only she could perceive. On the morning chosen for the separation, the sky dawned covered in heavy gray clouds. The rangers arrived early, carrying equipment and specially prepared carriers to make the process as painless as possible. First, they tried to guide Kali towards the truck that would take him to the deer valley. The young deer immediately resisted, his hooves planted on the ground, emitting sounds of protest that echoed throughout the reserve. He constantly looked back, searching for Sala, his large eyes filled with confusion and fear. It was then that Sala slowly approached Kali. The lioness pressed her immense snout against the deer's head, holding it there for long seconds in a gesture that seemed to communicate something profound and silent. Kali stopped resisting, as if he had received permission or a blessing to go ahead. With Zuri, the moment was equally moving. The little white puppy barked and scratched at the carrier gate until Sala bent down, licking its ears repeatedly, calming it with those low sounds that only they understood. And then they were gone.
The silence that filled Sala's enclosure after Kali and Zuri left was deafening. The lioness remained standing in the same spot where she had said goodbye to them, her eyes fixed on the gate through which the trucks had disappeared. Hours passed, and she didn't move, as if she expected her cubs to come running back to her at any moment. The rangers tried to offer her food, but Sala refused completely, turning her face away from anything presented to her. That night, the lioness finally moved, but only to lie down in the center of the enclosure, exactly where she used to sleep with Kali and Zuri. She sniffed the ground repeatedly, searching for the familiar scent of her adopted cubs. Her eyes, which had shone so brightly in recent months, regained that deep emptiness that everyone remembered from when she arrived at the reserve. The team watched from a distance, their hearts heavy, knowing they had done what was necessary, but wondering if the emotional price had been too high. Days turned into weeks, and Sala slowly began to accept her new reality. She started eating again, though with less enthusiasm than before. She continued living in the reserve, and the rangers noticed that she had begun to take care of other occasional orphans who arrived. But there was something different in her eyes, a distant memory that never left her. Sala carried with her the memory of those extraordinary months when the impossible became real and she experienced the purest maternal love any creature could ever know.
2 years had passed since that gray day of separation. Sala had visibly aged, her golden fur now carrying more shades of gray, especially around her muzzle and ears. Her movements were slower, more calculated, but she still retained that majestic dignity that had always characterized her. The lioness continued to live in the same area of the reserve, occasionally caring for orphaned cubs that arrived, but none of them occupied the same space in her heart that Kali and Zuri had conquered in those unforgettable months. One spring morning, something extraordinary happened. A deep, resonant call echoed through the reserve's fences, coming from the direction of the deer valley. The rangers immediately recognized the sound. It was a grown deer, but there was something familiar about that particular call. When they peered through their binoculars, they saw a magnificent male deer standing in the adjacent meadow, his coat gleaming in the morning sun, his posture imposing, and his antlers perfectly formed. It was Kali, now fully grown, strong, and healthy. Sala heard the call before any human could react. The lioness rose immediately, her ears pointed toward the sound, her whole body on alert. She began walking toward the fence that separated her enclosure from the outside area, her steps gaining speed with each passing second. When Kali saw her, he raised his head even higher and emitted that sound again, a call that had traveled across years and distance. The two stood there, separated only by a fence, gazing at each other in a silent recognition that needed no words.
But the surprise wasn't over yet. A few days after Kali's return, the rangers received an unexpected visit. A local family arrived at the reserve, bringing with them a strong, healthy adult white golden retriever pulling on its leash with uncontrollable energy towards the gates. It was Zuri, now an imposing dog whose white coat shone like snow under the African sun. The moment he spotted Sala's enclosure in the distance, he began barking frantically, his tail wagging with an intensity that made his whole body tremble with pure joy.
The Rangers, understanding the magnitude of that moment, made an unprecedented decision. They carefully opened the gates and allowed the reunion to take place under strict supervision. Zuri ran toward Sala as if the 2 years of separation had never existed, barking and jumping around the lioness with that same cub-like energy. Sala crouched down, licking Zuri's ears repeatedly, emitting those low purrs that only he knew. Kali, watching from a distance through the adjacent fence, raised her head majestically, completing that impossible scene that proved a universal truth. The unlikely family was reunited, and everyone who witnessed that moment understood something profound about the nature of love. It didn't matter that they were of different species, that instinct should have separated them, or that logic said it was impossible. The bond created in those months of vulnerability and care had transcended all barriers. Sala had saved 2 fragile lives, but in truth, it was Kali and Zuri who saved hers, filling the void left by loss and proving that family is not defined by blood or species, but by the unconditional love that unites broken hearts in search of belonging and true connection. If you enjoyed the story, please like it. Subscribe to the channel to help me bring you more stories, and turn on notifications. Comment on what you thought and leave tips and suggestions in the comments. There are many other incredible stories waiting for you here on the channel. Keep watching and discover more extraordinary moments that will touch your heart.